Hi, this is Alan Liddell of WDEL Radio, Wilmington, Delaware, USA. If it's happening in the world of radio, every week at 10:30 a.m. on the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal and on the web at ckut.ca.
Welcome, everyone, to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. It is Sunday, April the 25th, and we welcome you to our weekly half hour of news and information from the world of radio. My name is Sheldon. I am here with Jill, and we thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to reach us, our email address is radioreport@yahoo.com. You can listen to us a variety of ways, live streaming or archived at ckut.ca. CKUT 90.3 FM is our radio station here in Montreal. We have a Facebook group where we have a bunch of new members this week. The Facebook group is International Radio Report. We welcome Alex, Ron, Jim, Scott, Julio, Jim, Dwayne, and Rob all joining us this week. We thank you for clicking the join button on the Facebook page, and we invite any of you to contribute material to the page, as many people do. We thank you all for your input to the page. And also we have our YouTube channel, which a lot of people seem to be using quite readily, and much appreciative of the new way of accessing the program. You can look for the YouTube page on simply checking for International Radio Report. And we did our first special edition this past week.
Yes, we did.
On April the 22nd. We had some late breaking news that we couldn't get to you any other way, really. So we took advantage of putting together a short special edition of the show. And a lot of you managed to check that out. We hope you had some success with the special events that were going on for International Marconi Day. So again, keep an eye on International Radio Report. You can find the recordings of the show there, some past shows going up regularly as well, and hopefully in the future some more special editions coming up as warranted. So we think that is going to be a useful tool for a lot of you out there. We've already heard from many of you thanking us for doing that. So we should get to today's stories. We have a number of things going on, some interesting ones which we'd like to comment on, and once we get the stories out of the way. Starting, though, with something going on which may be starting a trend, and it's getting us a little bit nervous, I think. It comes from Paul McLean in Radio World. And it's about a Cumulus AM radio station near New York City, which is going all digital. Cumulus is one of the major media companies in the United States. They own a lot of radio stations throughout the United States. Cumulus is planning to convert an AM talk radio station in New York City suburbs to an all-digital transmission next month. The station WFAS 1230 kilohertz AM is in White Plains, New York, and will use the slogan Digital AM 1230 HD, New Talk for New York. The company filed an application with the FCC that it plans to flip on May 24th. Its website carries a notice advising listeners that all analog radios will no longer hear the station, but that listeners can find it using an HD receiver, online streaming, mobile app, or smart speaker. Broadcasting in digital will eliminate annoying static and interference, improve the sound quality to equal FM radio and streaming, and extend the range for clear reception, it told listeners. WFAS will use the enhanced mode of digital HD radio. The decision by one of the country's biggest broadcast chains will commit an AM frequency to all digital is a notable one. The FCC recently approved the option for stations to take this step, but as Radio World has reported, there are only a couple of other stations on the air in the country with all-digital AM, including the Hubbard station WWFD in Maryland that has been kind of a national test case. Cumulus declined to comment on its plans for the station in response to a query from Radio World. In Florida, NIA Broadcasting, run by Neil Ardman, has flipped one station, WMGG, and told Radio World that as of today he is waiting on a transmitter with plans to flip another station, WTMP, also in the Tampa area of Florida. This is a little bit scary, I think, a little bit disturbing, and I'm wondering just how listeners are going to react to this.
One thing for sure, I was wondering because a few months ago, when we talked about the FCC kind of saying, well, go ahead if you want to switch that HD signal on, let's try it, let's see. And of course, the first thing that I thought was, okay, who's the first one who's going to want to do this? Maybe go full HD and go ahead with all of this. So I think they're using a small market radio station because it's probably like an experiment.
1230 is a graveyard frequency. It's a very low powered station, 1,000 watts daytime maximum, and most of them go down to like 250 watts at nighttime. So it's a very regional station, and like you said, maybe let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Putting a notice out, basically telling people that they have to use an HD receiver. People are probably going like, a what? Like, do I have one of those? Where do I get one of those? What's it going to cost me? Do I really need it? I don't know.
It's. I think it's going to be interesting to see if people do switch. What I'm afraid is people could decide, well, rather than buying an HD radio, I'm going to listen online. That could be a possibility. I think the next big step, these are small stations. Now, it's not because it's a small station that it's fun for the people that are listening, because I'm sure there are some listeners of that station that will just, wake up and it's like, what's this noise that I'm getting here? I think the test, if one big station, if a big network would decide that a few popular stations really go full HD, that's where I think we should be maybe scared of losing our analog radio. For now, it's, I think, testing just with, a few small stations. We're going to see how it goes, and is it worth it to do so? We know that the HD radio has not been a very big success in North America. And actually, it's been almost fading away slowly rather than taking ground. So this might be a new era of let's try to push HD radio and let's see where it goes.
Well, I think with Cumulus doing it, it's not a small company. This is a big, radio station owner in the United States. And if they're doing it with one small low-powered radio station, it probably is just that. It's a test. If we lose listeners, well, it's not a big deal. It's a small station, probably doesn't have a big audience. But if it works, well, how will they know it works? That's going to be interesting too. They'll have to figure out, how are we going to find out just who's listening? If it's a talk station and they get phone calls and stuff, well, maybe they'll be asking people, how are you listening to us, or things like that. Maybe they'll do a survey of some sort. But I think it's just the tip of the iceberg probably, and we'll probably see a lot more on this after May 24th once they flip this station. As to whether they plan to do this with others. And like you said, if we get a big station, a Clear Channel 50 kilowatt station doing it, then it's going to really have an impact, not just on a very local audience. Our next story takes us to a town not too far from Montreal, Lake George, New York, which is a bit of a resort town in upstate New York. And we have a report actually from News 10 Albany on Lake George, New York's own dedicated radio station hitting the airwaves. So we'll listen to News 10 Albany's report on this development in Lake George, New York.
The Lake George airwaves get radio broadcasts aplenty from Saratoga, Albany, Vermont, and myriad other places. But one news show is set to start bouncing across the mountains next month, based right around the lake and the people who live there.
It's a vibrant community, and they have never had a local station focused specifically and exclusively on them.
Lake George Radio hits the airwaves on May 1st at 93.5 FM, headed by award-winning radio announcer and Village resident Walt Adams. Adams has done previous work at stations like Saratoga Star Radio, also owned by Loud Media, the same group launching the new venture. That show and a Glens Falls-oriented station will share studio space in Saratoga Springs with the new Lake George venture, but Adams will also be doing the early morning show from a satellite studio right in the Village. The perfect place to keep the pulse not just on Canada Street, but out on the water, too.
I've never seen as many boats out on the lake as last year because of the pandemic. A lot of those boats have radios, and we'll be talking to them.
Lake George Radio is set to feature hit music, local news and weather, and guests from the village's business ecosystem. One regular guest will be Lake George Mayor Bob Blaze, the longest-serving mayor in the U.S. Adams is planning for the show to be for locals first, but knows that Lake George's economy runs on its tourist seasons. This year especially, that'll mean helping the people behind signature experiences like park concerts and Americade to get their voices out there.
To be able to tune to the radio station and hear about what's happening with Americade that particular morning brings these events to a whole new level.
Lake George Radio will air on 93.5 FM from Warrensburg to Glens Falls and Queensbury, and will also be accessible online at lakegeorgeradio.com. In the village of Lake George, Jay Petriquin, News 10 ABC.
So obviously this is interesting to see that Lake George wants to have its own radio voice. I mean, why not? It's fun to have a little community station that focuses on our, environment, on our little part of the world. There's too many radio stations today that are like, general coverage stations that go across the nation. It's kind of fun to know that they're going to have a little radio station that's going to be, local news, local events, what's happening in Lake George. I think it's cool.
Yeah, I like stations like this. We used to get a lot more of them on the air, and there aren't as many of them now. If you're a medium wave DXer and you DX the graveyard frequencies, 1230, 1240, 1340, 1450, 1490, you get a lot of these small town radio stations that broadcast there, and they have interesting local content. They may I've listened to some of these stations in the past. They on the morning show, they announced what the menu is going to be at the lunchtime at schools in the area. They have local obituaries on the air of, who's at the local funeral parlor this week. Really interesting little local stuff that's really not of much interest to anyone else. What happens when they have these regional stations is quite often these smaller towns just they get swept under the carpet. You don't hear anything about them.
No.
This one is going to be very local. They realize that, a lot of people come into town. It's a resort town. It's right on Lake George itself. And I think this will cater to those people coming into town as well as the locals. I like the fact that the longtime mayor of the town is going to be on the radio station quite regularly as well. So that's kind of fun. So anyways, as the report said, you can check them out, lakegeorgeradio.com, and they will be starting on May the 1st on 93.5. I know we have a bunch of listeners in upstate New York who either listen. A couple guys I know get CKUT off the air down there. They're up at a bit of elevation and they do pick us up, and others that do listen to us online. So maybe if you're in that area, you can take a listen to the station when it comes on. Let us know what you think of it. But I like to see little hometown radio stations like this popping up.
Yeah, I miss those. I remember when I was a teenager going up north, and there were a few of those in the Laurentide area, and focusing on very local events. You knew what was happening there. And we kind of lost that, and it's sad to see that a lot of them have gone away. So the sun this week is quite active, and we have a lot of things happening. The first event happened on April 19th with Sunspot AR 2816 that erupted during the late hours at 2342 UT. It produced a strong M1 class solar flare. This is one of the strongest flares of the Young Cycle 25. A pulse of X-ray and ultraviolet radiation from the flare ionized the top of the Earth's atmosphere, causing a shortwave radio blackout over the Pacific Ocean. Mariners and ham radio operators in the area might have noticed unusual propagation at frequencies below 20 MHz. Interestingly, during the radio blackout, the sun generated its own bursts of radio noise. Shock waves from the solar flare rippled through the sun's atmosphere, creating plasma instabilities and natural radio emissions. These radio bursts may have penetrated the blackout, causing roars of static in the loudspeakers of shortwave radios at the same time that normal terrestrial signals were suppressed. So this is, the effect of a growing solar cycle. Big flares coming up, and we'll have probably bigger flares. So the effects of solar flares, of course, is attenuation of signals on the sunlit side of the Earth. We also have a little bit of news concerning solar cycle 25. So it seems to be slow in coming together. I get messages from time to time of people saying, well, where are the sunspots? Are we getting a new cycle? Well, it says here that you probably think solar cycle 25 is a dud. Think again. Despite long stretches of spotless quiet, the new solar cycle is actually running ahead of schedule. The sun is performing as we expected, maybe even a little better, says Lisa Upton of the Space Systems Research Corporation. She's a co-chair of the NOAA-NASA Solar Cycle 25 Prediction Panel. In 2019, the panel predicted that solar cycle 25 would peak in July of 2025, plus or minus 8 months, with a maximum sunspot count of 115, plus or minus 10. The current behavior of the sun is consistent with an early onset near the beginning of our predicted range. If current trends hold, solar cycle 25 could peak as early as 2024, similar in strength to the relatively weak cycle of cycle 24. Don't be fooled by the adjective. However, it's like hurricane season. Even a weak season produces hurricanes, and all it takes is one good storm to do a lot of damage. I'm not surprised that people are grumbling about solar cycle 25 being a dud, says Upton. Weak cycles are typically preceded by long stretches of spotless days, and they are slow to ramp up. All of this is consistent with our prediction, and now the waiting begins. As sunspot counts increase over the next year, forecasters will be able to tell if cycle 25 is really following the official prediction or doing something completely different. Predicting the solar cycle is still an infant science, and much uncertainty remains. So we got to stay tuned for that. As for what's happening, we did have another flare from Sunspot 2816. It's pretty active. It created a C3.8 class solar flare, and it actually had a solar tsunami that was created out of it. It is a wave of hot plasma and magnetism, about 100,000 kilometers tall, racing outward at approximately 250 kilometers per second. That's 560,000 miles per hour. Such waves are usually associated with the launch of coronal mass ejections, and indeed, one has been observed. And basically, we are in a geomagnetic storm warning. As of today, April 25th, a G2 class geomagnetic storm is possible due to that coronal mass ejection. And so that means that you might be looking at auroras tonight if you live in a dark area. And, of course, maybe degraded radio propagation. The solar flux hovering above 80, 84, 85. So lots of stuff happening on the sun this week as we are slowly getting into deeper cycle 25. But the best thing to do, turn on the radio, listen.
This is Gregory Majewski of Oakdale, Connecticut. You're listening to International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
We move next to another survey. It seems that there's lots of surveys going on about radio, and that might be an indicator that people are very concerned about, is radio the way to go? What's happening to it? Is it peaking? Is it dropping off? Well, this one is looking at U.S. radio listeners and how they are engaged and how receptive they are to advertising on the radio. And it comes from Tom Vernon, Radio World. In these challenging times, or perhaps because of them, radio continues to play an important role in the lives of consumers, and the majority of radio listeners are receptive to sponsorship messages on the platform. Around 156 million Americans 18 and over, which is 63% of adults, listen to AM/FM radio daily, and they are attracted to it for several reasons. That's according to Radio, Live on Air and Everywhere, a recent survey conducted by NPR and Edison Research, which also identifies 6 segments of radio listeners based on why they listen. And I like these categories, and I like the response as to why they think they listen. So here they are. Radio heads. 9% of radio listeners. They listen for all audio needs. They listen to the most radio of any of the categories. Connection seekers, 16% of radio listeners. They listen for company and connection. Infomaniacs, 18% of radio listeners. They listen for their need to consume news and information. Rhythm rockers, 27% of radio listeners, listen for their need to consume music. Laid back listeners, 17% of radio listeners, listen to radio only in the background. And habitualists, 13% of radio listeners, listen to radio when it is the only option available. AM/FM radio listeners are more engaged with ads on radio than ads on TV or social media, according to the research, which also said that the heaviest users of radio are also the most open to its advertising messages. The survey suggested an interesting breakdown of NPR, National Public Radio, versus AM/FM listeners. When ranked by time spent listening, the leading 3 groups, radioheads, connection seekers, and infomaniacs, preferred NPR. On the other hand, the trailing 3, the rhythm rockers, the laid-back listeners, and the habitualists, listened more to conventional AM and FM radio. So what category do you fall into?
I fall into the, actually, depending on the age that we talk about. As a teenager, I was a rhythm rocker, but today I'm more an infomaniac, actually.
Yeah, I think I kind of fall into that category now as well. Definitely younger rhythm rocker was one of the key things to listening to top 40 radio and what have you when there was so much happening. But I very seldom listen to radio for music anymore, but certainly for information. But I think, there's a lot of people in some of these other categories, maybe even higher than some of these percentages that they quote. Listening to radio in the background, I'm surprised that that's only 17%.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do that, whether it's in the car, whether it's at work, maybe just the radio playing in the house. I'm a little bit surprised at that number being only 17%.
Yeah, because I know everywhere you go, I went to for some papers in an office the other day, and what was, I immediately hear that in the background. They were playing one of the FM stations here in Montreal, and everywhere you go, there are some radio stations in the background. So I would think that maybe this is higher actually than that number, but maybe they're not reporting it. Maybe, because it's kind of at your workplace, it's like it's there, but you don't kind of realize it, especially when you listen to it all day long. It's easy to forget that radio is there in the background.
And I think you probably block out the advertising that they run too. Like you kind of, really ignore that. That's even further in the background than the music or whatever that might be on. So anyways, interesting categories. I thought it was a neat article and a neat survey. And I'm sure a lot of these surveys are being taken simply because of the state of radio. A lot of companies concerned about where their stations are going, what the future might be for them. So I think that's why they're looking at these sorts of surveys.
Yep, and it's important to have that information because, like we talked last week, there's too many people that think that radio is one of those old technologies that people just don't use anymore, when in reality, it's very, very present, and a lot of people listen to it.
Oh, yeah, the numbers are there for sure. When they're saying 63% of adults, 156 million Americans listening every day. So proves that it's still viable for sure. We have a list of upcoming ham radio contests to wrap up the show with today. Quite a few of them and some interesting ones going on. We'll start with the 1010 International Spring contest. It's a CW contest running all day, May 1st and 2nd, 0000 to 2359, May 1st and 2nd, sponsored by the 1010 International Group. It is CW only and covers the HF bands.
We have the RCC Cup 03 Zulu to 0859 Zulu May 1st, sponsored by the Russian Contest Club. And the bands are 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters, and it's CW and SSB.
We have the AGCW QRP Party, 1300 to 1900 Zulu May 1st. It's sponsored by the German Telegraphy Activity Group. The object of this is the promotion of low power operation. Participation is open to all radio amateurs and shortwave listeners. The bands are 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10. It is QRP only and CW only, and no decoding devices can be used. So you actually have to be sending and receiving yourself without the aid of devices to decode the code.
No cheating, guys.
No.
7th Call Area QSO Party, 13 Zulu May 1st to 07 Zulu May 2nd, sponsored by the 7QP Contest Group, stations of the U.S. 7th Call Area, Arizona, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming, become the pursued, and the rest of the U.S., Canada, and the world tries to work as many of us on as many bands modes as possible over an 18-hour period. All modes, standard HF bands, no work bands.
That'll be good if you're a state chaser, trying to pick up at least one station from every state. You got some states there that don't have a lot of hams in them, so it might be a good time to do that.
Absolutely.
Indiana is having their QSO party, 1500 Zulu May 1st to 03 Zulu May 2nd, sponsored by the Hoosier DX and Contest Club. It is for amateurs worldwide to contact as many stations in Indiana as possible. It is 160 through 10 meter bands, phone, and CW.
We have the Delaware QSO Party, 17 Zulu May 1st to 2359 Zulu May 2nd, sponsored by the First State Amateur Radio Club. The object to contact as many in the Delaware stations as possible. The modes are phone, CW, and digital.
And finally, the New England QSO party, 2000 Zulu May 1st to 2359 Zulu May 2nd, sponsored by the New England QSO party group. The object is to contact as many New England stations, and that is Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont, in as many New England counties as possible. It's 80 through 10 meters. New England stations can work anyone, anywhere. It is phone and CW. So lots of states on the air for the weekend, lots of opportunities to pick up some of the more rare ones if you have not logged hams or communicated with hams in some of those states.
And remember that they might be ham radio contests, but you as a shortwave listener can actually take part by listening to them. So it's important to know that it's not just for amateurs. Even shortwave listeners could have fun listening to all of these stations when they're contesting.
Yeah, and I think the bands will be pretty crowded with all of those state contests going on. So check them out if you have a chance and see what you can hear. That is going to do it for us today. We thank you for tuning in. We will be back again next Sunday for our next edition of the show. You can reach us by email, radioreport@yahoo.com. We invite you to check our Facebook group, International Radio Report, and you can check out the show and past shows and our special edition shows on our YouTube channel, which is International Radio Report. Have a great week, everybody. We will speak to you again next week here on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
Bye-bye.